the top table, page 11, and then I'll go into details about what you need to know specifically for this one. Alright, so here's our lumen, all the white space, and then working our way down, this is all mucosa. Remember the duodenum has this really thick mucosa layer. There we go. So now we can get 3 of the layers at least in here. Here we have the mucosa layer up at the top still. Right here, this is going to be our submucosa, right there. And everything else we see is the muscularis externa. Now remember, circular is always closer. So here we're seeing those, it kind of looks like we saw on the models, it looks like longitudinal, but it is circular because it's closer in. And again, we have a cross section now, right? So that's again why we know it's circular. So circular here, just here in the corner, you can see that little tiny portion of longitudinal, where it's longitudinal because it's going to be going like this, okay, because we have cross-sectional. Now the serosa would be the layer after it, and the duodenum kind of has a sketchy serosa depending on where you look, so let me see if I can't find a good view of it. Alright, there we go. So serosa again, remember it's just going to be connective tissue. After the muscle, here's the muscle, here's our serosa. Right? Now for the duodenum, there are 3 things you need to be able to identify. The first 2, the villi and the intestinal crypts and glands, those are going to be both found in here. Let me get to a good place with some nice villi. So we already had to know villi from the first section, so hopefully you remember what those are. Those are just the finger-like projections. I want to get to a good section with the villi. Alright, not having much luck here. There we go, looks decent. So here you have some villi, again, just the finger-like projections going into them. So here's a villi, here's a villi, here's one. Now the crypts or glands are just the indentations, okay? So if we put a pointer here, that will be a crypt or gland, an intestinal crypt or gland. If you put it here, that's a villi, okay? Don't outsmart yourself and put lamina propria, okay? We're going to be asking you to identify the structure for here or here. Make sure that you put villi, not lamina propria, okay? Don't outsmart yourself. Alright, the last thing we need to know are the duodenal or Brunner's glands. And, yes?
What's that corner again? That crevice?
The inside, yeah, so like the area in between the villi will be the crypts or glands. So it's the intestinal crypts or glands. There's also a name in parentheses, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce, but you can use that name as well. Okay, they're interchangeable. Yeah. So it's space in between or villi. So it's like a crypt or a gland, right? So it's like an indentation. It's basically, the reason you have villi is to increase surface area. So that's all it's referring to, is that extra surface area. Now the Brunner's glands you're going to find in the submucosa, and these are going to be the best way to know that this is the duodenum versus the esophagus or the stomach or the ileum, okay? So look in the submucosa, can you see this patch right here that kind of looks like a sweat gland? That's a Brunner's gland, okay? Just remember, it kind of looks like the sweat gland. The Brunner's glands in the small intestine, or in the duodenum portion of the small intestine, and the Peyer's patches that we're going to look at next in the ileum, both of those structures are found in the submucosa. So if we put a slide up here that has the submucosa in it, after you look at the mucosa, so first step, look at the mucosa, determine whether you're looking at the esophagus or small intestine based on what you're seeing here. You can see that we don't have simple squamous epithelium, so we know that this isn't the esophagus. Next, look at the submucosa, see if you can't make out anything in here. If we're showing you the duodenum or the jejunum, and we're asking you to identify the whole side of the organ, we'll be putting either Brunner's glands or Peyer's patches in that view, because that's like such a key way to identify these structures apart, okay? So look for this for duodenum. And I'll get back to stomach, I haven't forgotten about that, but I'm going to move on to the ileum. since I'm talking about it anyway. So keeping in mind what we just saw with that, we'll look at the ileum, we'll be able to see that the structures we'll be able to see here, and the pairs patches are very different. I love it when I like immediately go to it, it makes it so much easier. So if you look in the submucosa, just kind of orient you here, here's the mucosa layer, definitely a lot less thick, right? The duodenum is that first portion of intestine, so that's where you get the vast majority of your absorption taken care of. So you don't have as many villi or anything else, which is why we're not really covering those here, and you only need some of the duodenum. But in the submucosa, which is all of this, we have Peyer's patches. So this big purple mass, that's a Peyer's patch, again found in the submucosa, okay? Don't let this throw you off because that's such a small mucosa and make you think that this is still part of the mucosa. This is about the line that you can draw for the submucosa versus the mucosa, okay? And again, you're just looking for a dark granulated patch. This one is like exceptionally nice because it has that nice border. You won't always see that nice border. The best analogy I can make for a Peyer's patch is that it looks a hell of a lot like the lymphatic nodules or the white pulp in the spleen. Okay, it's kind of just going to be a slightly different color. Kind of like with the lymphatic nodules specifically. It wasn't that it was a color change even. It was that that area was darker in color, right? You had a more dense grouping of matter. That's what we see here at the Peyer's patches. It's just that denser group. I'm going to show you another one that looks a little less clear just for the sake of comparison. So you can kind of see one right there too. It's a little more broken up. That one's a decent one. There's one that was awful that I want to show you. There you go. That would kind of be one too. So this is one that I wouldn't put on the exam because it's not very clear. You can see that it's much darker and denser here relative to everywhere else, okay? So here's an example of something you might find if you put it under the slide as well. And this would still be Peyer's patch. Okay, but again, definitely look for the one that I showed you first for like the ideal one. Any questions before we move on to stomach? Okay. Yep, good, thank you. Alright. Get to a good price for this too. Alright, guess. All there. Okay, so one thing I want to point out, and I'm actually not going to change the magnification, just to kind of emphasize this point. We have for the stomach, just like we had for the duodenum, pits, instead of like crypts and glands, pits and glands, okay, but same thing. We're looking for those indentations. Relative to the indentations we saw in the duodenum though, these are much smaller, right? So functionally, the stomach doesn't do as much absorption, not as important, same structure. So if you were to get this on a slide, and on the exam, it's never a bad idea to just quickly look, see what magnification you're looking at, okay? That way you're not going into the situation completely unaware of what you might be looking at. So this is at the lowest magnification, and you can see that we're pretty zoomed out. This was like the last time we saw like crypts and glands that are like huge. These ones are very tiny, okay, relatively speaking. And again, same magnification, be wary of that. So again, this would be the pit or gland, gastric pit or gland. Now there's one more thing you need to know for this, the rugae. I'm going to draw a rugae, or actually I still have my drawing on the board. I don't want you to know the rugae for the histology slides because I can't think of a way in which we could point to it and ask for rugae in a way that would be straightforward and not confusing. So I'm going to explain to you what it is, but I am not going to have you guys know it for the histology. You'll still know it when we get to the digestive system, but for this, go ahead and cross it out, okay? It's just, there's no point in knowing it. It's kind of hard to explain, and again, impossible to point to. So if you look over here at my really tiny teensy drawing, basically what you'll see is that there are small villi, so small little bumps, that make up bigger bumps. The big bump that's composed of small bumps, one of those is a rugae. Alright, and again, there's really no way to point to this in a way that wouldn't be confusing because we can't really draw borders on either side. So that's what the rugae is. We'll be able to see when we look at the models of the stomach, but it's not a fair question to ask for histology. So there you go. There's the concepts. If that's not, if you're not clear with that, definitely let me know so I can clarify that. But that's the last time I'm going to be talking about rugae for slides. All right. Any questions? Great. All right. So one more order of business, the vote.